In our last lecture, we encountered an ethical doctrine, the so-called doctrine of double effect, according to which consequentialism is, in one crucial respect, too simple an ethical view. By making the rightness of actions solely a function of the goodness of their consequences, it was alleged, consequentialism implausibly neglects to take account of the intentions with which the agent acted. But according to defenders of this doctrine of double effect, the intentions with which an action is performed often do matter to its rightness. Specifically, while it is sometimes permissible to cause a lesser harm in pursuit of a greater good, where the lesser harm is merely foreseen but not intended, an action is morally wrong, or at least much harder to justify, if the harm is intended and not merely foreseen. If this doctrine of double effect is right, two actions with the same consequential profile can differ in terms of permissibility, one being right, the other morally wrong, due to a difference in the mental states with which the agent acted. In today's lecture, I want to look at a different but related criticism of consequentialism, namely that it is wrongly indifferent to how exactly a given outcome is brought about. According to standard act consequentialism, when our acts will affect who lives or who dies, what matters morally to the assessment of our act is how many people will live and how many will die. By contrast, the precise causal details of how this result came about are typically deemed morally irrelevant. This feature of act consequentialism, however, can sometimes generate implausible implications. We can bring this out by looking at a pair of cases. The first is the one that preoccupied John Torek in Should the Numbers Count? In Torek's case, we can either give our dose of a scarce drug to one stranger or to 5 other strangers. If we give it to the 5, let's call this option A, they will live and the 1 will die. If we give it to the 1, let's call this option B, he will live and the 5 will die. Now let's contrast Torek's case with a different scenario that we first encountered in our first lecture. In this case, we can harvest the organs of a healthy patient and use them to save the lives of 5 other patients, each in need of a life-saving organ transplant. If we do harvest the organs, let's call this option A, the 5 will live, but the 1 will die. If we don't harvest the organs, let's call this option B, the 1 will live and the 5 will die. Now, according to standard act consequentialism, option A is the morally right thing to do in both cases, at least assuming that no further untoward consequences will result from harvesting the organs of the 1. For option A, we have stipulated, has the same consequential profile in both cases. You make it the case that the 1 will die and 5 will live, and the alternative in both cases, option B, is that 1 lives and 5 die. But moral common sense rebels at this equivalence. To most of us, it seems that while it is morally right to choose option A in Torek's case, choosing option A in the organ harvesting scenario is clearly wrong, indeed morally reprehensible. So, despite these two actions having the same consequential profile in terms of outcomes, we think that one is permissible and the other is impermissible. What could explain this intuitive difference? Well, there's a pretty straightforward explanation that suggests itself. There's an important causal difference in how the outcome is brought about in these two cases. By choosing option A in Torek's case, you save 5 lives and let 1 other person die. The alternative, option B, is to let 5 other people die. By contrast, if you choose option A in organ harvesting, you save 5 lives and kill 1 other person. Once again, the alternative, option B, is to let 5 die. So, according to this explanation, which I will dub the simple story, the causal difference between killing and letting die matters morally. All else equal, the simple story suggests we have a stronger duty against killing a person than against letting a person die. More generally, our duty not to do harm to another person is stronger than our duty not to allow harm to come to another. In fact, our duty not to kill is so much stronger than our duty not to let die that we mustn't kill one person, even if this means letting 5 others die. By contrast, in a choice between letting either a larger or a smaller number of people die, we ought to choose the smaller number, all else equal. This story is simple, neat, and wrong. At least that's the takeaway message of Judith Thomson's famous paper, Killing, Letting Die, and the Trolley Problem, which was our assigned reading for today. The trolley problem, which was first introduced by the British philosopher Philippa Foot, but which was really put on the map and given its name by Judith Thomson, challenges the simple story that I've just told. According to the simple story, when all else is equal, it is wrong to kill one person rather than to let 5 die. The trolley problem, however, suggests that this is not always the case, and hence that the simple story is too simple. Let us remind ourselves of the features of Thomson's trolley case. However, rather than having me narrate it for you, let's watch a little clip from a British documentary on the trolley problem. Roll the tape.
We've recreated here a famous thought experiment called the trolley problem. Down this stretch of track, a runaway train is about to career. In its path are 5 unsuspecting people who will all die if the train hits them. But there's a switch. It will divert the train onto another track, saving the 5, but condemning 1 unsuspecting person to certain death. In essence, you have to decide, do you kill 1 person who's not in peril to save 5 who are? So, will random passers-by flick the switch or not? Okay, we're going to start it. I'm going to start the train. Okay, ready? Train's oh, you moved it. You've switched it. Yes, last minute intervention. He's going to die.
Sorry.
You've intervened.
I have to.
You have to intervene.
Yeah.
Most researchers find, as we did, that the majority of people will flip the switch.
Let us give a name to the scenario that was just played out for us. Let's call it the bystander case. So, as you could see from the clip, most people, if they imagine themselves in the position of the bystander, judge that it would be permissible for them to turn the trolley onto the sidetrack, saving the 5, but killing the 1. I'm sure that many of you watching at home will have had this same reaction. Now, why do I say that this moral judgment of ours challenges the simple story? Take a moment to consider this question. I'll be waiting for you. All right, here's the answer. If you deem it permissible to turn the trolley in the bystander case, your intuitive judgment challenges the simple story because, were you to let the trolley continue, you would let 5 die. By contrast, pulling the switch and turning the trolley means that you kill 1 who, but for your intervention, would have lived. And yet, many of us still think that it is permissible to turn the trolley, at least absent special factors such as negligence on the part of the 5 or a special obligation to the 1. So this suggests that the simple story can't be right. Our duty not to kill doesn't always win out against our duty to prevent death. Intuitively, it's permissible for you to turn the trolley, killing 1, rather than to do nothing and allow 5 to die. So in that connection, I have another tricky question for you. Here's the question. Why does it matter for the purpose of challenging the simple story that you are the bystander in Thomson's scenario? Because when Philippa Foot originally discussed a trolley case in a 1967 paper, she imagined a case where you were the driver of the trolley and had to decide whether to run over 5 people ahead of you on the tracks or swerve onto a sidetrack where you'd run over a single person. I put it to you that this case of Foot's doesn't challenge the simple story in the way that Thomson's bystander case does. But why not? Again, please take a minute to consider your answer. I'll wait for you. Well, the reason why Foot's case by itself doesn't challenge the simple story, at least according to Thomson, is that she thinks that if you are the driver of the trolley, what you face isn't a choice between killing one and letting 5 die. What you face instead is a choice between killing one or killing 5. As the driver, you're the one who's been piloting the trolley, which is now threatening to run over the 5. That their lives are in danger is the causal consequence of something that you, the driver, have been doing. Even if you were now to throw up your hands and say, I can't decide, and simply let the trolley plow on into the 5, that wouldn't count as letting the 5 die, according to Thomson. Since you yourself are causally responsible for the threat now bearing down on the 5, if you fail to turn the trolley, you will have killed the 5, she thinks. So what we have in this case, Thomson thinks, is simply a choice between either killing 5 if you don't divert the trolley, or killing 1 if you turn it onto the sidetrack. Suppose you judge, as most people surely would, that it would be permissible for you to turn onto the sidetrack. Well, that judgment by itself is no threat to the simple story. The simple story tells us that in a choice between killing 1 and letting 5 die, our duty not to kill has to take precedence. That's the claim challenged by Thomson's bystander case. By contrast, it's quite compatible with the simple story that in Philippa Foot's driver case, where your choice is between killing 1 or killing 5, you ought to kill fewer people rather than more, all else equal. All right. So I hope I'm starting to convey to you a sense of why Thomson's article was such a bombshell when it was published in 1976. We had this neat and relatively uncomplicated story about the morality of killing and letting die, which to many philosophers at the time seemed eminently plausible. And then along comes Thomson with her bystander case and blows this simple story out of the water. So that's one reason why Thomson's 1976 article is justly famous. It presented a compelling counterexample to the simple story. But that's only part of the reason why Thomson's paper has become famous and spawned such an enormous literature in philosophy, psychology, and many other disciplines. Indeed, it has even penetrated all the way into popular culture as well, as today's bonus clip from Michael Schur's hit show, The Good Place, attests. The other part of the reason comes into focus when we ask, well, if the simple story is false, what should replace it? This is where things start to get really complicated. The plot thickens when we think about a second variation on the trolley case, also due to Thomson. Let's return to our friends from the BBC.
What's interesting is when you change the specifics of the trolley problem just a little bit, you get very different outcomes. If you say, well, instead of throwing a switch, you have to push someone onto the track, and the train will kill that person, saving the 5. And people drastically change their opinions.
I mean, no, I wouldn't do that, but I can't tell you why.
You wouldn't? Would you do it?
No.
Does it feel like a different problem now?
Yeah.
It feels like a different problem now, the man in the video says. In the so-called large man variation of the trolley case, it seems impermissible to most people to push the large man off the bridge, killing him, in order to block the trolley from killing 5. Intuitively, this case feels more like organ harvesting, where we also object to killing 1 so that 5 may be spared from death. The trolley problem, then, is this. How can we account for the intuitive difference between the bystander case on the one hand and the large man case and the organ harvesting cases on the other hand? In all 3 cases, the agent faces a choice between killing 1 person or letting 5 other persons die. But in the bystander case, killing the 1 is intuitively permissible. Yet in large man and in organ harvesting, killing the 1 to save the 5 is intuitively morally wrong. What, if anything, can account for this difference in our moral intuition? I think, as the puzzled reaction from the woman in the documentary attests, the answer to this question is far from obvious. Now, one way in which one might respond to this challenge is by simply rejecting the question. Instead of trying to find a way of explaining and justifying our contrasting intuitions about these cases, we might instead try to resolve the tension in our judgments by challenging the soundness of these intuitions. This is the answer that a number of prominent evolutionary psychologists, for example, Joshua Green at Harvard, have given to the trolley problem. And it's also popular with many moral philosophers of a utilitarian persuasion, for instance, Peter Singer. One argumentative strategy that is particularly popular with these skeptics is to try and debunk our intuitions about the trolley problem. To debunk an intuition or belief in general means to give a causal explanation of why people have the intuition or why they hold the belief, which at the same time suggests that it may be false. According to debunking arguments about morality in particular, some of our moral intuitions or beliefs have their causal origins in evolutionary or cultural processes that do not track some objective moral truth. Therefore, the debunkers say we ought to be skeptical of these intuitions. In the specific context of the trolley problem, debunking arguments have focused in particular on our intuitions in the large man case. Proponents of such debunking arguments, such as Green and Singer, tell an evolutionary just-so story about how we may have come to hold the intuition that it is morally wrong to push the large man off the bridge, even though this would save 5 lives. Whereas we don't feel similarly squeamish about killing 1 to save 5 in the bystander case. In the prehistoric past, they say, when many of our cognitive systems for thinking about morality evolved, virtually all interpersonal violence was what they call up close and personal. To do serious harm to another person, you had to club them over the head or shove them off the edge of a cliff or something like that. But since violence, at least within the in-group of the family or the tribe, was in general counterproductive to the evolutionary fitness of our species, it was adaptive to develop a very strong, almost instinctual aversion to any form of violence that was up close and personal. So, having the intuition that it is wrong in general to do violence to another person in a manner that is up close and personal generally served us well, which is why this intuition reproduced itself. At the same time, however, this causal explanation of how we came to have such intuitions is entirely compatible with the possibility that, at least in exceptional cases, for instance, cases whereby shoving 1 person off a bridge we are able to save 5 lives, our intuitions in fact misfire and give the wrong answer. Hence, understanding how we might have come to have moral intuitions, like our intuition about the large man case, should at the same time lead us to be skeptical about their content. By contrast, though the bystander case of the trolley problem also involves killing 1 to save 5, the violence here is not up close and personal. You kill the 1 remotely by flipping a switch. This is the kind of harmful action which only became possible much more recently in our evolutionary history with the advent of modern technology. As a result, we do not have an evolved predisposition to consider such forms of violence categorically taboo, which we've seen might distort our moral reasoning. So perhaps, Green and Singer conclude, these are the kinds of cases that we're more likely to be thinking rationally about, without the distorting influences of our Stone Age evolutionary baggage. And that's why, all things considered, we should be more ready to trust our moral intuitions about such cases. Now, this, of course, is a result that is pleasing to a utilitarian like Singer, since most people's intuitive judgments in the bystander case are exactly what would be implied by utilitarianism. So, what should we make of this debunking strategy for explaining away our intuitions in the large man case? Well, the moral philosophers who've thought most deeply about the trolley problem have, of course, considered such arguments. But, by and large, they are unimpressed. Here, for example, is my esteemed former advisor, Francis Cam, perhaps the world's leading expert on the trolley problem, discussing Green and Singer's proposal. Roll tape.
So philosophers of my stripe, analytic moral philosophers, spend a lot of time discussing this one case that's been made famous called the trolley problem. Okay? So there's a trolley headed towards 5 people that's going to kill them. And a bystander could turn the trolley onto another track away from the 5, all right? But unfortunately, there's one person on the other track who'll get hit and be killed. And the question is it permissible to do that, to turn the trolley? So here's an imaginary case. It's not like I'm there, standing there, okay? There's another variant. There are thousands of variants. These are all like little thought experiments. This is what he means by saying that I think of myself in a case, all right? So the trolley's headed towards the 5 in this other variant. There's someone standing on a bridge over the trolley tracks. If you push that one person in front of the trolley, it will stop the trolley and save the 5 people from it. May you do that? Now, many people say, and here the question is, I haven't done surveys. This is another part of the method. You think about it. I think it's permissible to turn the trolley away from the 5, though it will hit the 1. I do not think it's permissible to push the 1 person over in front of the trolley, even though, again, 1 person will die and 5 people will be saved. So what's the difference? All right, why do I have this intuitive judgment? I make a judgment about right and wrong. Some psychologists have thought that the only distinction between these 2 trolley problems I've introduced you to is that in the one case, I'm up close and personal to the person I push over the bridge, but not the person that I turn the trolley to. Now, the way you deal with a hypothesis like that is you think, well, suppose instead of pushing the person over the bridge, I had a machine that from a distance I could press a button and it would push the person over the bridge. Do I think that makes it permissible to push him over the bridge? And I say, intuitively, my judgment is no. So when I remove the factor that is presented as the crucial variable between permissible and impermissible, I do not get a change in my judgment about impermissibility, which suggests that this factor is not accounting for my judgment. Now, this is a way, of teasing out whether a particular factor, a conjecture, is correct or incorrect.
All right, so let us move on from attempts to debunk our intuitions in the pair of cases that make up the trolley problem, and see instead if we can explain and justify them. This is what Judith Thomson attempts to do in Killing, Letting Die and the Trolley Problem. According to Thomson, there is a morally relevant difference between bystander on the one hand and large man and organ harvesting on the other. It is this. In bystander, you redirect an existing threat from the 5 to the 1. By contrast, in large man and in transplant, you create a new threat to the 1. So far, that's just a causal distinction between the cases. But Thomson thinks that there's an associated moral principle that makes this causal distinction morally relevant. In order to achieve a better distribution, Thomson thinks, we are morally permitted to do something to the thing to be distributed, either good or bad. For example, we may permissibly redirect it from a larger to a smaller group of people if it's a bad thing, or redirect it from a smaller to a larger group of people if it's a good thing, as in the health pebble case in Thomson's paper. By contrast, we may not do similar things to a person in order to achieve a better distribution, Thomson thinks. As she writes, a person is not something unowned to be knocked about in order to bring about a better distribution of something else. In other words, we may permissibly bring the trolley to a person, as in the bystander case, but we can't permissibly bring a person to the trolley, as in the large man case. What should we make of Thomson's proposed solution to the trolley problem? Well, on the plus side, it does clearly succeed in drawing a distinction between the bystander case and the large man case. The question is whether it does so for the right reason. Does Thomson's explanation latch onto the factor that is really doing the moral work? I think it's testament to what a great philosophical puzzle Judith Thomson uncovered that her own attempted solution to solve the trolley problem arguably falls short. Here are two problem cases for Thomson, which I think should lead us to be skeptical about her proposal. Consider first a case which I'll call fallen large man. So imagine that through no fault of his own, a large man has fallen onto the tracks in front of 5 others who are trapped further down the tracks. I'm a bystander, and I know that the trolley colliding with the large man would bring it to a halt and save the 5 further down the tracks. Now, suppose that the large man himself is unable to move out of the path of the oncoming trolley, but that I, the bystander, could easily move him off the track without endangering myself. By contrast, I could not move the 5 further down the track. So imagine that I'm about to come to the aid of the large man, but then I pause and I think to myself, wait a second, this large man is such a conveniently located obstacle to the trolley. If I help him off the tracks and save his life, the 5 will be crushed by the trolley. So I decide to refuse my aid to the fallen man, leaving him on the tracks in order that his bulk may protect the 5. Here's a second case that raises a similar worry. This one is a variation on the organ harvesting case. Let's call it denied treatment. So imagine that A and B are fatally injured. They each require an organ transplant in order to survive. Alas, the only available source of organs is person C. Now, as it happens, C's own life is threatened by a disease. But this disease, let's imagine, is easily and reliably treatable with a drug, which I possess and could give to C. Let's also imagine that no one else has a claim on the drug or needs it. However, I decide to deny the drug to C and allow her to die. I do this in order that, once C is dead, I can then harvest her organs and transplant them into A and B to save their lives. Now, over the years, I've discussed these two cases with many students, and a large majority of them share my sense that the behavior described in fallen large man and denied treatment seems morally wrong. Intuitively, it seems wrong to deny help to the fallen large man or to the patient who could easily be cured, even if letting them die would then enable us to save a larger number of lives. So our judgments about these cases, in fact, mirror our judgments about the original large man and organ harvesting cases. But now notice the following. The factor which Thomson identified as doing the crucial moral work in large man and organ harvesting, namely the creation of a novel threat, is in fact entirely absent in both fallen large man and in denied treatment. Both the fallen large man and patient C are already in danger from a pre-existing causal process that you, the agent, did not initiate. So Thomson's proposal cannot capture our intuitions about these cases, and why they mirror our intuitions about the original large man and organ harvesting cases. Indeed, there's perhaps a more radical lesson to be drawn. The two problem cases cast doubt on the thought that it is the causal distinction between killing and letting die which is doing the important moral work in the original large man and organ transplant cases. Well, why is that? Now think about it. In Fallen Large Man and in Denied Treatment, we don't kill anyone, no matter what we do. Both options in those cases involve letting someone die. And yet, it seems wrong to deny treatment or to not help the fallen large man off the tracks, just as it seems wrong to kill the one to harvest his organs or to push the large man to his death. So this suggests that the factor that is doing the real moral work is something that is in common to all these four cases. And that factor, therefore, can't be the distinction between killing and letting die, which isn't present in Fallen Large Man and Denied Treatment. So, if not Thomson's own proposed solution, what might account for the intuitive difference between the bystander case on the one hand and large man and organ harvesting on the other? Well, how about the idea we examined in our last lecture, the doctrine of double effect? This seems to get our intuitions about the cases we've considered so far exactly right. The death of the large man comes about through direct harmful agency. You're intending to put him in harm's way. Likewise in organ harvesting. By contrast, the death of the one on sidetrack comes about through what Quinn calls indirect harmful agency. You are foreseeing, but not intending, that he be put in harm's way. Putting him in harm's way is in no way necessary for the success of your plan. Quite to the contrary, you'd be delighted if by some miracle the one man on the sidetrack could free himself and were able to escape from the tracks before he was hit by the trolley. Note also that, unlike Thomson's proposal, the same double effect reasoning can also explain and justify our intuitive judgments about the fallen large man and the denied treatment cases. So, has the solution to the trolley problem been sitting right under our noses all along? Is what explains our divergent intuitions about bystander and large man just the doctrine of double effect, which focuses on the agent's intentions in acting? If only things were so simple. Alas, the doctrine of double effect runs into its own difficulties in further variations of the basic trolley scenario. One of these we already discussed in our last lecture, Cam's trolley enemy case. Just to quickly recap, imagine that everything is as in bystander, except that the one person on the sidetrack happens to be the bystander's arch enemy. So the bystander turns the trolley away from the five and onto the sidetrack, but not in order to save the five, but rather with the intention of killing his arch enemy. According to the doctrine of double effect, this should make a crucial moral difference. Intending as opposed to merely foreseeing harm to another person is verboten, according to the doctrine of double effect. So turning the trolley in the trolley enemy case ought to be morally wrong. But is this what we actually believe? Was what the bystander did impermissible because he acted with the intention of causing harm to another? Well, that is not Cam's verdict about her case. Although the bystander may have revealed himself to be a horrible person for intentionally aiming to harm another person, and should probably be blamed for having acted with these intentions, these are matters of agent assessment. But what we are interested in is not how to assess the bystander as an agent, but how to assess his action. Was it morally wrong for him to pull the switch and turn the trolley? To this question, Cam thinks we must answer in the negative. Although the bystander may have acted with bad or inappropriate intentions, that does not make his action morally impermissible. A second problem case for the doctrine of double effect, the so-called loop case, comes from Judith Thomson herself. I think this is an especially fun case to think about. Take a look at this diagram while I narrate the case for you. So, as before, a trolley is hurtling down a track towards 5 people, and you can divert it onto a side track. However, in this variant, the side track loops round and rejoins the main track. So, diverting the trolley still leaves it on a track which leads back to the 5 people. If there were no one on the side track, the trolley would simply loop around and hit the 5 people from behind, killing them all. However, there is someone on the side track. In fact, he's a very hefty individual who, if he is hit and killed by the trolley, would stop it from continuing on to the 5 people. So what do you think? Should the bystander flip the switch? And if yes, why would that cast further doubt on the doctrine of double effect as a plausible solution to the trolley problem? I'll give you a moment to think about it. Okay, welcome back. Well, here's how Thomson herself thinks we should answer my 2 questions. Thomson's view is that it should be just as permissible to turn the trolley in the loop case as in her original bystander case. As she writes, what moral difference can an extra bit of track make? But if that's right, she thinks, this casts further doubt on the doctrine of double effect. After all, in the loop case, isn't the agent intending to hit the one? Otherwise, what point would there be in turning the trolley in the first place? Hitting the one is necessary to the success of the agent's plan. If the one on the sidetrack somehow managed to free himself and escape off the sidetrack, the bystander would not be delighted in this case, because it would scupper his whole plan for saving the 5. So, in turning the trolley, Thomson thinks you must be intending to hit the one on the sidetrack. And yet, intuitively, turning the trolley in the loop case seems just as permissible as in the original bystander case. Well, if that's right, then the doctrine of double effect doesn't provide the correct solution to the trolley problem either. Okay, so by now I'm sure you're starting to realize why many moral philosophers have gone half mad trying to crack the trolley problem, and why it's considered by many one of the most difficult problems in normative ethical theory. But I want to end this lecture with a ray of hope. So what I'll present to you in concluding is an approach to the trolley problem that's interestingly different from all the approaches we've considered so far. Though it too confronts certain difficulties, it is, to my mind at least, the most promising line on the trolley problem currently on offer. So here goes. Despite their important differences, the simple story, Thomson's proposal, and the doctrine of double effect have one important thing in common. They are all what we might call agent-centric approaches to the trolley problem. According to an agent-centric approach, the morally relevant differences in the trolley problem concern facts about the agent. Either facts about the causal role played by the agent, for example, does the agent kill or let die? That's the factor highlighted by the simple story. Or does the agent initiate a new threat or instead redirect an existing threat? That's the factor highlighted by Thomson's proposal. Or a difference in the agent's intentions. This is what is highlighted by the doctrine of double effect. But what if these agent-centric approaches to the trolley problem are all, pardon the pun, on the wrong track? Perhaps the crucial distinction is not agent-centric, but what we might call victim-centric. In other words, perhaps what matters is the causal role that the death of the victim, i.e. the person who is either killed or let die by the agent in order to save the greater number, what causal role this plays in bringing about the desired outcome. That essentially is Frances Cam's thought in her book, Intricate Ethics. According to Cam, the salient causal difference between bystander and large man is that in bystander, the harm to the victim is causally downstream from saving the 5. The death of the 1 is a side effect of saving the 5, but is not a necessary means to bringing about the saving of the 5. That's already accomplished by turning the trolley. By contrast, in large man, and also in organ harvesting, the death of the victim is causally upstream from the greater good. The death of the 1 is a necessary means to the greater good, the saving of 5 lives. It is only killing the 1 which enables us to save the 5 in these cases. Likewise, in denied treatment and fallen large man, it is only letting the 1 die which enables the 5 to be saved. Here, letting the 1 die is a necessary means to achieving the greater good. All right, so it looks like we've identified a causal distinction that appears to sort all the cases into the right permissibility categories. But we still want to know, is there in fact a deeper moral justification for thinking that this victim-centric causal distinction actually matters? Here I want to present to you, in very simplified form, some ideas that my friend, the philosopher Alec Wallen, presents in his paper, Doing, Allowing, and Disabling, Some Principles Governing Deontological Restrictions. In large man and transplant, it is only killing the 1 which enables us to save the greater number. However, Wallen argues, it is wrong to treat people as general-purpose resources for saving the greater number. A person's valid claim against being killed or let die is not suspended or overridden whenever the person's death would be causally necessary in saving others from a threat that they have come under entirely independently. By contrast, things look quite different in the bystander case. Here, the person's death is in no way causally necessary to bringing about the greater good, which is already achieved, we said, by turning the trolley. Rather, in a sense, the presence of the 1 on the sidetrack gets in the way of a method of rescue that, but for his presence, would have been just as efficacious and morally entirely unproblematic. This makes it the case, Wallen thinks, that the claims of the 1 against being harmed are caught up in the welfare of those already facing a threat. Because respecting his claims against being harmed would mean foregoing a rescue which, but for his presence, would have been morally entirely unproblematic and just as efficacious. His claim against being harmed is diminished. And this, Wallen thinks, is what explains why it is permissible to turn the trolley in the bystander case. So, what do you think? Does this victim-centric proposal hold promise? Or does it too run into fatal problems in certain cases, such as, for instance, the loop case, which we discussed earlier? I look forward to discussing these questions with you in next week's town hall. For today, I'll leave you with one final solution to the trolley problem, which is pretty innovative, to say the least.
Uh-oh, Nicholas. This train is going to crash into these 5 people. Should we move the train to go this way, or should we let it go that way? Which way should the train go?
This way. Uh-oh.
Yikes! I suggest we all keep a close eye on little Nicholas. That kid seems like trouble. Well, that's it for today, folks. If you've made it this far, give yourselves a big pat on the back. And as always, I look forward to seeing you again next week.